There you go. Should be recording now. Okay. Start over. I'll have to go back. So some of the tactics for negotiation. One of the problems is when you're negotiating with someone else and you're so frustrated with the other person that you're having trouble focusing on the problem that you're trying to negotiate through, or the negotiation tactics that you're just confused about what's going on, and you're having trouble separating the person from the problem you're trying to resolve. So an example is a contractor, and I'm gonna make one change. Hold on one second. Okay, so example is a contractor that's really skilled, pretty knowledgeable, and his boss keeps putting his oldest subcontractor. Let me reframe that. A contractor keeps putting his oldest subcontractor, the one that's the most skilled, the most experienced worker, on the toughest jobs. Okay, and the contractor lets the younger subcontractor work on easy ones. The subcontractor who's a little bit older is complaining to his wife at home that his boss is punishing him and trying to get him to retire. And so he comes home every day, he's sore, he's tired, he's like, I've been doing this forever, and he keeps putting me on the crappiest jobs. It's a horrible situation, I don't like this job, right? And so the contractor is getting frustrated because the subcontractor keeps grumbling, and the subcontractor is upset because he feels like he's being abused or trying to be pushed out to retire. And so the situation here is you think the other person is attacking you, basically. And if you rephrase it and you separate the person from the problem here, what might be another scenario? The contractor, are you talking about from the perspective of the contractor or the subcontractor? The subcontractor is the worker, the contractor is the one that's telling them what to do, giving them the jobs. The subcontractor is the one you see in the picture. He's the one that's doing the actual work. And he's doing the hardest jobs. Anyone out there in chat land? How could you change the scenario here if you were able to see both perspectives? So you're coming at a third party maybe, and you're seeing them argue. Yeah, Clayton?
He'll be putting the oldest one on there because he has the most experience. He can handle the tougher jobs with the younger guys or girls may not have had the experience to do the work.
Okay, so Clayton's saying that maybe the contractor's putting this subcontract on the toughest jobs because he has the most experience, and he's nervous about putting the younger men or women on that job because they don't have that experience, and he's worried about them screwing that job up, right? So if you started negotiating and you came to a more broad perspective of what's going on and the motivations behind the two. So if the subcontractor learned that the reason why he was getting put on the toughest jobs is because the contractor trusted him the most, right? So if you learn that, could the subcontractor come back and negotiate some different terms, right? So what is part of the problem is they're not having this situation where they're talking. If the subcontractor is getting tired and burnt out, and after 8 or 10 hours of hard work, it's just getting tougher, maybe you can negotiate like shorter hours, or maybe it's a supervisor role, or maybe they could have somebody who's younger working with them to do some of the hefty lifting, and the subcontractor to give a little more guidance or something, rather than doing all the hard work and the expertise level. Or maybe there's some different pay or something. So if you learn that to expand your perception and not just put the person is making you do something into your frame of reference, it's helpful. One of the things that's helpful is defining the real problem. The real problem is the contractor wants somebody with the most experience to do the toughest job. It helps to put yourself in the other's shoes. Oftentimes, you think of it in frame of your own mind because you're coming from a place of fear where you're saying like, you think the contractor is trying to kick you out because you think you're older and you think that he's doing this just to get you retired so he can hire younger people. Whereas the case, it might be totally the opposite. So coming out of the worst situation, you think that in your mind and it might not be the case. So not blaming others for your problems. Discussing both parties' perception is helpful. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. What about win-lose negotiations? What if you're talking to somebody and you realize that this person is not giving up any information, they're not being reciprocative, they're not allowing you to find out anything on their end, so you're having trouble developing an integrative negotiation, you're just going for the win-lose type negotiation. And if you remember some of the stuff we talked about last week, like having a good alternative, understanding what your target price is, when you're going to walk away, right, with your resistance point, and trying to figure out what the other negotiator's zone of potential agreement is, where you think you can actually communicate. So those are some of the things we talked about last week. So if you think about those, if you're entering into a win-lose negotiation, remember what we said about anchoring and counter-anchoring. When you walk on the car lot and you see the price on there, they're anchoring. That means they're trying to put an anchor, if you use the metaphor of a boat, they're trying to set the price of the negotiation close to their initial bid. So they're trying to anchor it and hold it there. Whereas if somebody creates a ridiculous first offer, remember what we said last week, is your counter anchoring needs to be on the opposite end of that spectrum. So if you're talking about, somebody's offering that car and they're trying to sell it for $10,000 and you know that it's worth around $5,000, you got to come back with an equally unrealistic amount to try to bring that back to that point where you want to sell it and buy it for. Okay. And if it's closer to the reality, you probably want to be closer to the reality too and try to get it somewhere in the middle. So that's a tool that they can use when you first enter that situation, is you got to get it to the point where you think you can meet closer to your target point. And if you don't think you're ever going to enter that zone of potential agreement, if you don't think you can get it into that area, then that's where you can walk away. Concessionary moves. So one of the things, you can kind of see how quick the negotiation is going to go. If you're countering and they say 10,000 and you say 2,000 and they say 9,500 and you say 2,500 and they say 9,000 and you say 3,000 and it keeps going back, it's like tennis. You got to think like how back and forth it's going to be before you can get on a spot. If you keep going back and forth and it keeps going to the middle, that's a good sign. But if they keep saying 9,000 and you say 3,000 and they say 8,900 and you go 3,500 and you're giving up way more than they're giving up, you're going to end up closer to them. And so you got to go at your own pace to try to get it to where you're get at, right? So the concessionary moves, they should be equal. And if they start not being equal, then you kind of realize that they're not going to be giving up too much. Remember I talked about timing as one of your tactics that you can use in win-lose negotiations, is that if you're eating up all their time and they have other things to do, that could be an advantage to you. So it could be work for you or against you, depending on what's important to you. Sometimes if you get stuck, like in the example of the car negotiation, and they're not going to budge on the price anymore, see if they can throw in other things. If you think that's a good deal and you would probably move forward on it, but you don't feel like it's a great deal, and you feel like they can still budge, but they're really firm on the price, is there other things they can offer in? So maybe car washes or floor mats or something like that, or service guarantees or something else. What's really common and what's really frustrating if you worked in sales for a while is something called nibbling. And that's usually after you close a sale, or at least I wouldn't say close a sale, but you agree on a price. And so on the car, that would be an example of you agree on the price and it's $6,000. And then the buyer says, well, can you throw in floor mats? And then the seller goes, all right, well, it's not too big a deal. Fine, I'll give you the floor mats. And they say, well, can you throw in an oil change too? I'm like, okay. And they say, well, what about a car wash? And you're like, all right, that's enough. So often people, that's a little tactic they use after the prices. It's oftentimes annoying, but oftentimes people use it to just try to get a little bit more. So just be conscious that that's something you can do, and it could happen to you as well. So. Okay, we're gonna see if we can do a little activity. So make sure you get your chats ready on this, and we're gonna see how it goes. So I've never done this online before, so we'll see. So I have some 5 items here. Chocolates like you would get for Valentine's Day, a box of chocolates, some pearl earrings, a men's watch, like a nice one. So it's not like what's a real nice? It's not like a Rolex or anything, but it's like a high quality. It's not like one you would get at Target. It'd be something a little higher end on that. What's a good brand that we could talk about, agree on? Anyone? Timex, is that Fossil? Nixon? How about Nixon? Does that sound good? I don't know what Nixon means either. So if Nixon doesn't mean anything to you, then you have to assume whatever that price is. So that's probably a better one. So let's go with the men's watch is a Nixon one, a designer sunglasses like Ray-Ban, and some Bluetooth speakers. So you've got 5 different items here. Some of them you might know if you buy every day. Pearl earrings, you might know what the going rate of a good pair of pearl earrings are, right? So take the last 2 digits of either your social security number or your student ID number. I don't need to know what they are. That's how much money you have. So for me, I have $88, right? And that's how much money you have right now in your wallet. And you're looking at these 5 items. Of the 5, just answer to yourself, and you can chat it if you want. Which items do you think you can buy with $88? And so for me, I would say chocolates, maybe the Bluetooth speakers. I don't think I can afford the pearl earrings, men's watch, or designer sunglasses, but I don't know. I don't have a good idea of how much Ray-Bans are, so, or pearl earrings, or Vixen watches. So answer yourself. Which of those can you buy, yes or no? So most of us say the chocolates. Bluetooth speaker, maybe. Maybe I should have done the 3 digits, but I don't know how much Vixen watches are. But Nixon or Vixen? Nixon. Okay. So for each item, let's go down. Let's just do the chocolates for now. For each item, considering the amount of cash that you have, so I have $88, just text, and try not to look at everybody else's text, but just text the amount you would pay for that chocolate. Yeah, I mean, if you saw what's the maximum, if you didn't know the price on there and you had to pick it up and go ask the customer service person, like, you know, what is the most you would pay for a box of, I think those are Russell Stover chocolates. It's like, yeah. Yeah, that's the day before. It's the day before Valentine's Day. Thanks, Simon, because that makes a difference. 75%. Okay. And I'll throw up the chat here. Oh, and Nisa says they're Lindt chocolates. I don't know what Lindt is. They're more expensive than Russell Stover. So Lindt are much better. Okay, so that probably throws everybody's numbers off anyway. So let's go to the Bluetooth speakers. You know, you have that cash in your wallet, and it looks like Sonos Bluetooth speakers, Sonos brand Bluetooth speakers, and do the same thing. How much would you be willing to pay for those if you didn't know the price? They're about it's a little bit bigger than a can of soda. I don't know what Sonos is. $75, right? Do you have more than 75 bucks in your wallet?
That's exactly what
All right, so we could go through this for each of these. Some of these things you can afford and some of you can. And if you ended up with your last two digits is 1 and 3, you'd only have $13 in your wallet. And you're like, I wouldn't even buy that, right? And Charles says there's 165 on Google. So when you look at items and you don't know what the price is, and there's been some studies that have shown that the amount that you're willing to pay is the amount that you have in your wallet. And so when you're dealing with people that are negotiating with you, you have to understand that the way they anchor things isn't always based on what reality is. They're going to base their value of things that they're going to buy on what they have, and they have the ability to buy. And so partly what we do when we talk about the sales and marketing strategies is if you're dealing with people and you're struggling with getting people to pay the amount that would make it a profitable business for yourself, part of it is you might not be dealing with the right type of customer, because they're anchoring the amount that they think is of value to them based on the amount that they have. And so if that makes sense to you, some people just don't think that it's going to be a good value. And so when you're trying to negotiate with them, it's the amount that they have that is basing their decisions on how they're going to enter negotiation. So it's an interesting study, and I've done it before in class where we all write these down, and it's shown that the amount that you think you have, you'll anchor differently. So if you have, $88 in your pocket, you might be willing to pay a little bit more. So the price that you mentioned up here would probably be a little bit more than if you had $48 in your pocket.
a lot of people these days don't carry cash.
That's true.
Just a credit card.
Well, you think that's an advantage. So Daniel said a lot of people don't carry cash in their wallets, and you can be guaranteed that it's put to the use of companies that want to get your credit card out. There's a lot of places that prefer you not to have cash. That's why I always carry cash and try to pay for that stuff, because when I see the money coming out rather than just like swiping it, it changes the perspective of how much I want to spend. So good point, Daniel. Okay, so to follow up on tactics, in win-lose negotiations, what are some tactics that we can follow? One of those is closing the deal. If you're getting to the point where you're giving it, you know, if you're losing ground every time you negotiate back and forth, because you think if you close the deal right now, you'd be good, and you want to close it faster, you can signal the end before the end. So like I said, if you're going back and forth and you're saying 3,000, they're saying 9,000, you're saying 3,500, and they're saying 8,500, and you see that it's not going fast enough to where you're going, you can start signaling that, hey, I'm running out of wiggle room here. Like I can give you 4,000, but that's about all I can do. You can start adding little comments to the negotiations back and forth to try to get it closer to your side. So if you still feel like you're still negotiating, but you want to start bringing it to your side, start signaling it that you're getting close to ending it. Or if you don't want to negotiate anymore, when hopefully you signal it once or twice before that, you're like, all right, I'll order 4,000 is the highest I can go, but after that I can't negotiate anymore. So that, you know, it doesn't feel like it's an abrupt stop. Because if you're going back and forth at a good pace and all of a sudden you just stop and then that's it, it's not usually acceptable to the other person. What happens if they want to make another request after their last offer? Like the nibbling, or they say $4,000 and you say, okay, fine, $4,000, and then they say 3,500. They want to get it even cheaper, even after they agreed already. You say tough and you walk away. Remember, think about your alternative offers. You can go buy it somewhere else or whatever. Go back to your alternative offers and use that as a tool, right? Okay, some integrative negotiation tactics. This is where you're trying to create the win-win. Remember, ask open-ended questions, and make sure you're listening too, and not just for the words that are coming out of their mouth, but the other clues that are going on. Remember about the movies, figure out what else interests them. So you're not listening for what they're saying, but also what they might value, which you might use some of their body language or anything else to figure out what's going on. Let's see. A lot of this we've gone over, so let's move on a little bit. Okay, let's move on to mental errors. What are common mental errors that people make during negotiations? Escalation, partisan perceptions, irrational expectations, overconfidence. Let's go over those. What is escalation? This is where you go into a negotiation and you don't want to lose because your ego gets in the way. That means if you lose a deal, you're like, oh man, I really wanted that, right? So you keep negotiating past the point where your resistance point is, where you said you would walk away, but you keep on negotiating because you can't bear to let it go. That's why oftentimes people want to set up a sale as an auction. If you've ever been to an auction, people get all excited and raise up their hand and they keep driving up the price, and you know, you're fighting over your other people that are bidding. So that's specifically structured to get you excited about it. And even the style, if you've ever been to an auction, about how the auctioneers do it and the way they signal the signs. So if you haven't been to them before, it's an emotional experience, and you feel it when people are bidding on stuff. Agent issues. We'll talk about agent issues in a little bit, but it's when you have somebody else negotiating for you. What are some of the remedies of escalation? Make sure you understand your alternatives. Go back to your BATNA, have it written down. Share your resistance point with others before you enter negotiations. And I don't mean the person you're negotiating with. But if you're going into that car dealer and you say to your wife or your best friend, you're like, I can't spend more than $4,000 on this or $6,000 or whatever that price is, share it with somebody else and say, hold me accountable to this. And that way, when you come back from the negotiation, they say, how much do you get it for? You're like, man, they offered $6,500. That was lowest I would go. And I walked away, right? So just having somebody accountable and that they know what you know. So, I mean, you could always fudge it if you went back and you hadn't told anybody, like, yeah, 65 was the most I would pay for it, because you didn't tell anybody. But if you had told them beforehand, then you have to go back and explain why you went over. And so that's a helpful thing to be able to walk away from a bad negotiation. The example that I give outside of negotiations is, imagine you wanted to quit smoking and your goal was, I'm just going to stop smoking, but you haven't made any commitment to someone else. Imagine saying like, I'm going to give $1,000 to the opposite political party that I believe in if I smoke again. So you make an outlandish bet with somebody that you would never want to happen. And the situation is because I don't want to smoke again. And then if you smoke, you have to donate that $1,000. So sometimes telling somebody or making an outlandish bet with somebody prevents you from overstepping what you said you would do. That's kind of taken to an extreme, but telling somebody where your resistance point is helps you to not step over it. And if you're getting really emotional, take a break. Say, I need to think about it. So walk away or put it off to the next day. So you're not making a decision then. And after you cool down, you can see if you still want to move forward with it. Partisan perceptions, perceiving the world with bias. This means that you come from your own lens. You come from your own perspective. So if you understand that you have your own perspective, then you can see that, not everybody might see your own way. So recognize that it might happen even to you. So that's kind of like the contractor situation, not being able to see their side. And once you figure out, from their perspective, you can change. Irrational expectations, overconfidence, or groupthink. So if people tell you as a group, if you're in a business and you go in a negotiation that something is really valuable, and then you go into the negotiations and your group thinks it's really valuable and the rest of the world doesn't, you might have an overinflated idea of what something is valuable. So I won't go into too much detail on that. There is a link on understanding groups. We can watch that a little bit later. Maybe during the break, I'll post that. So. But it's really important that when groups get together and they decide what the value is or what you're negotiating, oftentimes people can think together and think that it's worth something, or what you're trying to negotiate is more important than it is. And so you get to almost an irrational value of what you're trying to get or to sell. So, like my mother has this old, what is that brand? What's a really valuable luggage brand? The purses. Not Samsonite, but more expensive. Gucci, I think? Louis Vuitton. So she has her mother's Louis Vuitton train bag, and I'll find it for you if I can. Louis. I'm totally spelling this wrong. Train case. So it looks exactly like this, actually. Right there. And you can't see it, right? I'll see if I can. There you go. You should be able to see that. So it's like this, and you can go online and you can see it for $3,200 on places, and so is my grandma. So it's not only like a valuable thing anyway, but it's also got the sentimental value. And so my grandma passed away a while ago. She was just about 100. She passed away a number of years ago, and like my mom has 7 brothers and sisters, so they got a big family, and they were talking about selling it and then using all the money to do a family get-together reunion. And so they asked me to sell it on eBay, and I'm like, I'm in this bad situation where like they want it for this ridiculously high value, and it's got some stains in it and everything like that. And so together they think it's really valuable. And so they won't accept anything less than what they came up with the number of. And it's comparable to something that you're seeing here. And I'm trying to say, well, the market's not paying for that because, they're not valuing it. So together, when they all get together and they think what that value is and what they're going to let it go for, they have a group's mentality of what the value is. And there's other factors in there that other people don't appreciate, like it was their mom's. And together they think it's worth this much and they're going to use it for that. So no one wants to let it go for just a market value, if that makes sense. So when you get into this negotiation, sometimes when you're operating with groupthink and they create this value, it's hard to get a market value of that. Okay. I know I'm talking a lot on this activity tonight, so I'm trying to get through this and the business processes. So if I'm talking too much and you want to chat about something else, feel free to interrupt. If I can. Okay. And this leads us into what happens when you're negotiating for someone else. And it can be really tough because you've got to consider all the factors that are going on in them. And then you got to present it in against somebody else. So you've got like this triangle situation here. So one of the things that's difficult is figure out what the person wants and values and then communicate to the other person and operate in between. So sometimes that can be an advantage because you separate a lot of the emotion out when you're negotiating for someone else. So there is some advantage, but there's also disadvantages. One of the problems is whose interest comes first? Is it the negotiators or is it the person you're negotiating for? And there are independent agents, non-independent agents, and agency issues. So independent agents are a person charged with representing the interest of another, a principal, in negotiations with a third party. So for example, a lawyer, an accountant, or a broker. Okay, so they're not really connected to the company or you. They're somebody you hire. Whereas a non-independent agent is somebody that usually works for you. They're your employee or they're part of your group. Okay. So the question I'm going to pose to you is an independent agent someone you hire to negotiate for you? Are they able to represent 100% of your interests? So for example, if you're hiring a real estate agent to sell your house, if you're hiring a real estate agent to sell your house, what interest do they have? To sell and get their commission, right? So they have alternative priorities as well, right?
They do, but it's tied into because they don't get commission unless they sell the house and when they sell your house, they don't have a commission.
Right. So they don't get a commission until they sell your house, and they don't get it unless they sell it. And the more that they sell it for, the more commission they get, right? Right.
Even though they have their own interest, but they're like mutually inclusive.
They can be mutually inclusive, right? Inclusive, yeah. That means that hopefully they're matching together. And that's one thing you want to look for is what steps are you taking to make sure that they're matching together, right? So one of the things when you're hiring an independent agent, you go, why are you doing this? And that's one of the things you want to ask, because it's never going to be always 100% to your benefit. They have their own interests. So you got to look at like the positive and negatives of why you're hiring somebody and just be honest that, they may have their own interest. And so to assume that they're 100% for you all the time is unrealistic. So you want to look at why you want to hire them. So oftentimes, if you know that they can make money off of you and they have their interest, why are they doing it? If it is not a benefit to you, there's no sense to hire them. One is that hopefully they enter negotiations for that type of work all the time. So if they're buying a house or selling a house, they're probably a lot more knowledgeable about the market and how to get you a better deal. So there may be ways to bring buyers in that would be interested in your type of house better, or they may know how to photograph it better or stage it better so it looks better to the people that are interested in buying it, or they might know how to do a bidding war or something like that that would engage a higher price and pay for that. If you're hiring a lawyer, they might know the law a lot better than you, right? Hopefully. So another reason is to put distance between you and another party. So especially if you're very emotional about a deal, it can be really a big disadvantage to you to get all heated and bothered in a negotiated deal. So putting some distance is helpful. So for example, divorces, home sales, selling your business, it can be very, very emotional. If you're doing a deal between two friends and oftentimes you want to get emotional about that and you feel like, you're not being nice by letting somebody else buy it. So, non-independent agents are employees that work for you. So it could be somebody that's in your group, one of your employees, but it can also be a union rep. So for us as teachers, we have a union rep that negotiates the deal with our district. So one of the problems with agency issues, let's talk about this for a second. Let's say that you run a restaurant, you're the small business owner, and you've been doing everything yourself. You always order the printing, supplies, and you're looking to expand. So you hire a manager or a purchasing agent to start doing some of the ordering. And this manager says, oh man, you're paying way too much. I can get it much cheaper, right? So they start looking at your printing costs and they're like, you're using this local printer, but I can get a printer out of town that's like 10%, 20% cheaper. What are some of the consequences of, having an agent negotiate for you just based on price? So if they're not familiar with your business, they're a new hire and their goal is to save 10 or 20%. So what do you mean by losing control? So it could be like a lower quality product, so the price goes down. Or there might be partnership advantages. I guess you can see that. Or not the right product for the job.
Maybe just looking at these, that versus only looking at costs, so a lot of other factors that play into deciding on the person.
So oftentimes with agency issues is not understanding the factors other than just what they think is the main goal, like price. And like what we discussed here, not the right product for the job, delay in delivery. You know, the printer might be going to your restaurant every day for lunch. They know all your other customers, and all of a sudden you're not hiring them, and then you've got a really upset customer and printer. So some of the agency issues is making sure they understand all the factors and decisions. So it's not just one. It's not just price that they have to weigh. It's some of the other factors that are important. So you have to prioritize the issues. Is price the most important? Is it quality? Is it delivery time? Is it the network that you're in? So understanding and coming up with the prioritization of what the factors are in a negotiation are important. And if you think about how politics are involved, like when you're negotiating peace treaties or whatever, it's not just one factor. There's lots of different players, lots of moving pieces in this, right? So it can be a really challenging thing to be a agent negotiating. Solutions are build a consensus. So you have a collective agreement. So you all say, this is what our priorities are, right? Everybody agrees on it. Educate and build a coalition. So you can say, these are the things that we're doing. And we have a team that says, this is what we're going for. You go into the negotiations and you work together, and then you come back and you present it to that coalition. Okay. So they can get more of a consensus. Okay. Let's move on a little bit. Maybe 5 more minutes and we'll take a break. I'm not going to go over all these. Okay. You can see this, right? Hold on one second. In your business, if you're developing negotiating processes for your business, and you're doing things over and over, and you're having different people come in and negotiate, you have different managers, different purchasing agents, and you're developing your negotiation skills as an organization, there is a process you can develop. And so people that know how your system works. And so if you're looking at this structure and you have this process and you're going into negotiations, you can look at this and have the whole team understand where you are in the process. Okay? So negotiations is right here. Oops. It isn't right there. There it is. Negotiations is like the third step, really. Before negotiations, you have preparation, and before that, you have pre-negotiations. So if you're looking at pre-negotiations as your first step, what could you imagine doing in pre-negotiations? Research, right? So if you're researching, let's give an example. Let's say you're trying to find a supplier. You're a coffee cafe, like coffee shop, and you're looking for a coffee roaster to get your beans. And so this is something you're going to spend a lot of your money on, and you're trying to negotiate, right? In the pre-negotiations, if you're doing research, what would be things that you would want to research? What would be important to you? What kind of coffee you want to use? Well, if you want to use local, what the customers might perceive the value of those things are, what other prices of what other suppliers are charging for theirs, how fast they can get it to you, how quality is it, how consistent they are, right? And so during that phase, you would be in pre-negotiations. In preparation, that would be immediately prior to your negotiating, right? So in preparation, what would you do before you walk into the meeting? What should you have with you? Practice, but what should you have?
Well, have some samples. You have some value that's okay. How much I can pay this, I can negotiate this price. Like this coffee is this coffee is cost this.
Okay.
So like
So know the price of competitors.
Yes.
Okay. So go back to what we talked about last week. What are some things that we should have in our hand before we walk into the negotiation?
Are not the word, but the price of like a walkaway price.
Okay.
Price.
So you should have your walkaway price, like the point where you're gonna go somewhere else. What else should we have?
D or BATA.
Okay, BATNA, which is your other options. You should, during your pre-negotiations, you should have done some research, and you're like, okay, I have this supplier, I have this supplier. Like if I don't get a deal and I figured out my BATNA and my reservation price when I walk away, like, you know what, I'm gonna walk away because I have this better deal. So you should know those things right there. Yes, like Laura says, info about the price and value. You should also have your target price, right? What you would, if you got that deal, then you would be happy. You could get that deal. So, all right. And as you walk through this, let's say you go through negotiations and you're negotiating with them. You're either going to get to an agreement or non-agreement. If the negotiations last for a period of time, you might take a break and come back the next day. And if that's happening, you would, get some information. You would get those samples back from the supplier. You would go roast them, see what customers think. You go back to preparation, go back to negotiations the next day after you get that feedback. So some negotiations don't happen right away. So you may get in this little loop right here. If you're doing negotiations all the time for your business, which was what will happen, after you come to an agreement or non-agreement, you're not done with the negotiating process for your business. After that, you'll get the deal, you'll look back on it and say, how'd it go? Okay, we got our target price, whatever, and in this, it would go to ongoing evaluating and learning. So after you get the deal, you might go through post-mortem learning, and you might go back and like, all right, I got the deal, I'm gonna see how it goes for a month with these customers that I have. And then you might go back to negotiations when you go to renegotiate with that supplier, okay? So the agreement might be, you will try it out for a month and see how our customers like it. Then go back to this and go back to negotiations again, okay? If you end up not agreeing for whatever reason, you can go back to there as well. That way you can go to your post-mortem learning, evaluate and prep for your next supplier. So a little bit better. Part of that post-learning, post-mortem learning is figuring out what you want to do. If you have a negotiation and it didn't end up well, but you have to make a deal because you have to have coffee because otherwise your customers wouldn't, be drinking something when you're there, you might have to make the deal no matter what because you're on a time crunch. In that case, you might go to Learning Capture and create a checklist or database of other suppliers or something. So that way, man, it would have been really helpful if I had 3 different suppliers I could call right now and figure out what their prices were. So anytime I go into negotiation, I have to get prices from 3 suppliers. So creating these checklists so that you're creating a system that when you go into pre-negotiations, it's like, okay, now I have a checklist that says I have to get 3 suppliers. And now it makes it easier the next time you do it. And your preparation is you create your BATNA, you create your reservation, you create your target price, you've got your 3 options. Okay, let's go. I'm not going to go over all of these. I want to take a break. Let's see. A lot of this we've gone over. So there's one. We're going to end it here, but I have a little top tips for the effective negotiator. And you can read that while we're taking a break. But it's 7:17 right now. Let's come back in 15 minutes, and that's let's come back at 7:35, okay? And I'm gonna stop recording or pause it. Please remind me when you come back at 7:35 to start it again. Okay, so one of the things that this program is about is it's small business growth, and I am recording, good. I think I'm recording. I'm recording. One of the important takeaways from this program, it's called small business growth because we assume you already have a business or you're already a manager of a small business, and how do we grow it? I initially created this program for the small business owner that is working for themselves and that is going to be hiring their first employee. And so we're wrapping up this first course, and then we're going to go into sales class, and then we're going to go into a marketing class. And a lot of the tips you're going to need is how do I replace myself? And so that time management is really important. The negotiation is going to be really important because, you know, anytime you have new employees and anytime you're expanding, you're going to be doing some negotiation. So hiring your first employee is a negotiation. This next section we talk about is business processes. Is really important because when you start having employees and when they start doing your job, you need to be able to express how you're doing it, and you need to start designing how you want to expand your business. And so being able to identify what you do and communicate that well and have them understand what the goal is that you're trying to achieve is important. And especially when we're going to the sales and marketing plans, is having it well run, organized, and defined allows you to grow. And if you don't have a good system in place, the processes, then it's really hard for you to do that because you end up micromanaging. Your employees are confused, your customers get confused. But when you create that system, things help out. And they flow a lot smoother. So, and it's not that you even need to do it all yourself. You can incorporate your employees and your teams into helping you. So the next section that we have, business processes, is help you give a little guidance on how you develop those processes. So jump in at any time and ask questions or share some feedback on how you were trained as an employee or the business processes that you have. And I have to give the disclaimer is that I've always set up my business that I don't have any employees because I learned that I don't like managing and I like the entrepreneurial side. So a lot of this feedback is back when I was a manager 10 plus years ago. So I'd love to hear some feedback on any of these concepts applicable in the work that you do right now, or how you might employ them in the future. So, all right, so let's stop me talking and let's go on to the business processes. These are the topics that we'll talk about. And we'll try to get through those in the next hour. If we get through the first few of them, that would be the best. There are some videos on Blackboard that expand upon this, and this is what the quiz is based on. But I think if we tackle the first few of them in the next hour or so, it's will get us on the way of what we need to talk about. So what is it? What are business process improvement, BPI? It's the steps a business goes through to create value for the customer. And so one of the things that's important, one of the hallmarks of BPI, is that if it's not creating value for the customer, then you're not doing it right. And so the processes that you make shouldn't be beneficial to the company solely. It should somehow create some value for the customer. Now, you might create business processes to make your product cheaper because you're more productive. And you can pass that value on to the customer because you're maintaining low prices. Or you might know how to service a client better or create more value for them. And so that's what the goal is to create more value for the customer. They're important for your business because your team can increase value by adopting a process mindset. And when your whole team is on the process mindset, they understand that if they can do things better, improve their processes, and it creates value for the customer, then everyone's on board. Typically, having business processes improved will increase efficiency in your business, customer satisfaction, profits. It lowers your costs, errors. Okay. There are three key parts to BPI: inputs, activities, and outputs. Okay. And even a service business can have inputs, activities, and outputs. All right. So just as an example, an input is what starts the process. Activities are what you do with the inputs to make the outputs. And the outputs are the results of the activities. It's what you get out. So for example, if you're cooking, your inputs are all the ingredients, right? The activities are what you do with the ingredients, and the output is the cake. Okay, so if you're a bakery, these are your inputs, activities, and outputs. It's easy for products. It's a little bit more complicated for services, but it's still true. So what are the inputs, activities, and outputs for a service? For example, taxes. What are the inputs for taxes? Anyone in chat want to chime in? Data? So someone said data? Like what kind of data are for it? So if I'm an accountant and I put up a sign that it says 2016 taxes, come and do them, what are my inputs? How do you
start the process?
Yeah.
For taxes?
Yeah.
For other people's taxes?
Yep.
Collect their forms together.
How do you guys do taxes? Any of you use an accountant? TurboTax, right? So let's say we're TurboTaxing, all right? So we're not an accountant, we're an accounting company and we're offering tax processing software. What is it asking for? W-2, right? What else? Expenses, your spending costs. Okay. Bank statements. It might ask for maybe 1099s. What type of business you do? Is it a spouse? Are you filing jointly, singly? So all the things that are inputting into this equation, and then what happens when you have everything input, right? You would move to the activity, which is it calculates everything. And what's the output? The output is that it's going to file the taxes for you, right? And you either pay something or you get a refund. So in this process, the inputs that you take to do it and the activities are pretty understandable, but you're also talking about this from the customer perspective, right? If you're on the TurboTax perspective, if you think about all the activities that go on behind it, you've got accountants, you've got lawyers, you've got programmers, you've got everything that's creating this environment where when the customer puts in these activities, it spits it out pretty quickly, right? But you've got all these activities going on in the background that are going on. So this is a really complicated example because it's not baking a cake. You're talking about, okay, how do the lawyers and accountants get together, and when do the new tax laws go into effect, and how do they meet with the programmers? And so in this case, TurboTax is probably about one of the most complicated things we can do. But at the end of the result, you're taking the inputs from the customers, you're creating an activity, and you're producing an output. If there's a way for TurboTax to make that easier on the customer, right, you're creating value. Whereas before, you have to sit down and calculate it all yourself. We had a student in here at my 10 o'clock class, and she was saying that on QuickBooks app for self-employment, she has it and should sync to her bank account, And every time she drives somewhere, it senses that she gets in the car and they say, are you driving? And it pops a little alert and it says, is it for business or personal? Swipe left for business, swipe right for personal. And every time she drives somewhere for business, it tracks the miles. Keeps them a log. Every time she has a receipt, business or personal, business, clicks a receipt, it saves it. And so these processes that go on, it takes all that input and makes value for the customer, which is, it's easier to do. And when she said she had to do taxes this year, it was all on her phone. It was the easiest thing she ever did. So the way that taxes are done, they're creating business processes that gradually get better for the customer, right? For a haircut, what are your inputs? If you're a hairstylist, what are your inputs? What's that? Okay, so you ask the customer what you want. In my case, it was like a size, it was a 3 or something like that, right? So you ask them what you want, the style you want, you know, and then the activity is clipping the hair, and the outcome is, the output is the hair is done. And also, right? Also the experience too. If you think about a lot of hairstylists, why people go, it's not just about the hair cut, it's about, you know, the therapy that you get there or whatever the experience is. Right? Some people love to go, I mean, my wife loves her hairstylist and they go out for drinks afterwards. So it's like a whole process, right? So, I mean, for me, like when I go and take the boys, it's me, like how cheap can I get it? They get it, all 3 of us, because, you know, every month if I take 3 people to get their haircut, right? So my value is a little bit different. So, and the output is creating a business process that works for, what's important to me is not the same thing that's important to my wife when she gets her haircut. So the way you set up that business process with the input, the activity, and the output, it's 2 different processes, if that makes sense. And to answer your question, JC, the app is QuickBooks Self-Employment, I think. QuickBooks Self-Employed App. I think that's what it's called. I think it's QuickBooks. I think it's this one. And it's 50% off. Hey, I'm not promoting QuickBooks. I have no connection to them. I don't know if it's good or bad, but that's what it is. There was another, what is the improvement element? Well, if you look at taxes every year, it's hopefully getting easier and easier for you to use TurboTax or QuickBooks Online to make it easier. So if you're not improving and your competitors are, then you're going to be losing market share. You're going to not be creating value for your customer. So the improvement part is how you improve the process of what you're doing. In our business plan class, there'll be a section, if you're writing the business plan, it's a section for research and development. And that section should describe your business processes improvement, how you will plan on continuously improve your business. Okay, people, technology, and information. People carry out activities based on their inputs they receive. Technology is used to handle activities or improve activities. Information can be inputs or outputs. It's what we use to interpret processes. So these are the factors for business process improvement: people, technology, information. And we use them to improve the business processes that we have. Okay. The people carry out the activities. The technology is used to handle the activities or improve activities. Information, that can be inputs or outputs. It's what we use to interpret the process. Okay, there are many different ways we can make business improvements. Six Sigma is a very popular one. It is based on Motorola when they introduced it in the 70s and 80s. The Sigma means deviation from the standard. So they created a standard that they want for quality, and they wanted it within a certain percentage of that standard of quality, and they started working to improve all their processes towards that. Total quality management, it started in Japan with actually an American statistician, W. Edwards Deming. It was after World War II. And it started embedding quality in all the organization's processes. There's ISO 9000. It's industry standards set by the International Organization for Standardization. It doesn't set quality, but standards. So if you're talking about a machine company and they're making nuts and bolts, and Motorola buys it, and Hitachi, and Home Depot, and they're all buying these nuts and bolts, there has to be some measure where they can standardize things. So the ISO 9000 sets industry standards of how far the threads can be apart from each other and how deep they have to be. So if you're buying nuts from one supplier to the next, they should match up, right? So ISO 9000 makes standards for different industries. Kaizen and Six Sigma. There's a video here, and I'll just share that with you. You can watch later. We don't have time for it today, but I'll paste it to the chats, and you can watch it when we wrap up tonight. They kind of walk over the history of that, and it's pretty interesting to watch and learn about that history. There could be separate programs on these processes and how you could develop them and integrate it into your business. So if you're looking for a program like project management or something that could really set you apart from another employee and you want to go work for a business or even do consulting, learning one of these BPIs and becoming an expert on it will make you invaluable to almost every company, because if you can improve business processes and create more value for the customer, it's a really good skill to have. So I'm not going to go in too much depth for each of those. So I'm going to give you kind of a basics of what they all kind of use. Okay. Okay. Most of these processes incorporate some phases. 6 phases of most BPI efforts are the planning phase, the analyze phase, the redesign phase, the acquire resources phase, implementing, and continuing improve. And so most of them are a cycle where you're continuously improving. Okay, so you plan some type of change, you analyze and see if it works, and redesign it, acquire resources to do it, implement it, and then you continuously improve. You need to set some control that measures how well you're doing. Did it make an improvement? Is it better? Is it worse? Are customers more happy? Okay, so these are the general parts of the phases of the BPI efforts. The question you're probably asking yourself is how to know when you need it or when to use it. So for small businesses, what are some questions or red flags for you to know? The answer is before trouble starts, in quotes. So you can almost be guaranteed that all your competitors are trying to make improvements in the marketplace. And the people that offer the most value, or the companies that offer the most value, are going to get the most business, right? So having a continual process in place lets you stay ahead or at least competitive with the marketplace. So the steps to implement BPI usually follow: detect signs of trouble, create metrics to analyze if there's any issues. So especially, like, let's take a restaurant, for example. What are signs of trouble? If your customers are complaining, or if you're starting getting bad Yelp reviews, or sales go down, right? And then figuring out what the problems are, if you can, and select a process to improve. And remember, we talked about the 80-20 Pareto rule. If you could figure out what efforts are that you could implement that create the most return on your change, they're helpful. Defining the scope of improvement, the time and goals, creating SMART goals. Assemble a team or resources to help you make those improvements. Get everyone to agree on them. So this is how we usually implement BPI. So analyzing existing business processes. And so if you don't have a BPI already in place, one thing you can do is, what do you have right now? What's your process for doing something? And most of us that are small business owners that are non-employer, that just operate by ourselves, you need to look at what you do daily as a business process, because when you hire that first employee or you grow, you're going to need to show them how you do it. Now, we analyze through time management your daily activity log. If you showed that to somebody else and you told them this is how you do your business, is that going to be a good thing? I don't know. I can't answer that question. But you want them to emulate some business process. If you hire somebody, you're like, this is what the expectation is. And so you've already done some analyzation of yourself right now through a typical day, right? And so if you can create a business process of what you expect them to do, it should kind of look like that, right? Or if it's not what you expect, if it's not what you're happy with, you need to design it and create some improvement. So you create your own business process. So oftentimes, you know, if you look at your daily activity log, you're not doing one thing all day. You're not just making one cake all day, unless you're a bakery or something like that. You probably can look at your daily activity log, and I spent a little time on this, a little time on this activity, a little time on this. And you might be able to break each down into a separate process. So maybe one's sales, one's marketing, one's actually doing the work. And you look at each of those, you might be able to narrow the scope of what you're trying to do. So of all the things that you do, you probably might not be able to improve all of them. But this is where, like, what is the most benefit if I just refine one at a time? Which one should I tackle first? And you can compare it to a criteria. Is it going to be the one that saves me the most money? Or is it, I'm going to try to fix the most customer complaints that I have? Or which opportunities that I have for improvement that makes the most sense? Which one's the easiest to change? Which one makes my employees the most frustrated, or me if I'm the only employee? Which one would fix those things? So you list the processes, you compare it against some criteria that you want to solve. And hopefully you'll pick the one that has the most impact for the least amount of effort, the 80-20 rule. So how to analyze a business process? Create a map of the existing process if you can. Examine the map to identify problems or areas of improvement. Interview everyone, including customers, to gain insight in this process. Compare it to other organizations or industries. Is this how somebody else does it? Now, most of you could probably say in anything that you do, this is the process you walk through, from taking the inputs, the activity, to the output, right? And it's up to you to define what that is and make improvements how you want to. Creating a map lets you communicate this visually, how you want it to happen. So for example, if you are a technician and you're dealing with customers that are calling on the phone about this product you have, and you make lamps for your business, and the technician answers the phone, right? And they're getting customers calling all the time. What happens when the lamp doesn't work? The customer agent would say, well, is it plugged in? And the customer says no, you'd say plug in the lamp, right? If it is yes, was the bulb burned out? If the bulb burned out, then they say replace bulb and no repair lamp. So that's about the easiest one you can go through, right? So map making is a helpful way of diagramming what the process is, kind of like that negotiation one that I showed you earlier, that you can say, this is the process that we go through in negotiations. Okay, and after we're done with the negotiation, we'll go and we'll have a post-mortem dialogue, figure out what happened with that. And then we'll go from there, we'll check our checklist, see if we need to make changes, and we'll go back. The next time we have to prepare, we're ready. So you create a business process that flows through. If you're anything like me, the creative type that likes to be creative. I don't ever follow a recipe when I'm cooking. I don't like business processes myself. So if you're anything like me, this can be really frustrating to you to have to sit down and meticulously do this. But there's some people that are the engineer analytical types that love this stuff. So if this is something that drives you crazy, getting this detailed, there might be somebody or an employee that you're looking for that has this skill set, that when you're looking to bring somebody into your organization and you're looking to adopt more of these so you can have people do it, there are people that love this stuff. Okay, I've recognized that this is not my strongest asset, creating a process that other people have to follow. Okay, so how would you create a map? A box basically means an activity performed. A triangle is the decision-making process. So anytime you come to a triangle, it's like a yes or no. The arrow is a line of workflow, and the triangle is a filing or storaging of info and materials. So I'll show you how to use this in a little bit more. And if you want to practice, you could create an activity of how do you get dressed in the morning? How do you make that decision? Put on pants. Are pants blue or are they brown? Right? Okay. If they're blue, then what color belt do you use, right? Are they jeans? Are they this? Right? So you can, and then the socks will match the belt. I don't know. Right? Mine would probably like, does this look good? Ask wife. And then she would say yes, no. Right? So you can map it out however you want to map it out, whatever your process is. One of the hints is creating a start and stop point of like when the process starts and when it stops. What's the end result you're trying to get? And then after you create the start and stop points, you can start filling in the gaps there, right? And try to show the sequence of activities to create a pathway for customers or your employees or your business processes to walk through. That's the desired path. And then show that sequence. There's a bunch of free resources to help you do this. I got a couple links here. And they're pretty cool. There's one, it's called Process Flowchart. So it allows you to do this free. And it even walks you through how to do everything. So with tons of examples. Another one is Google Draw, which is in Google. So it's a little bit simpler. It's a little bit freer to use, but if you're doing any type of activity, you can, create the shapes that you want to use. It's pretty easy to do. Right? Anyway, what's the third one? Is Glyphy app. There's an app that does it as well. So there's a couple different charts that help you do it. And, even they give an example here, a flow chart. Organization chart, not a flow chart. So just a way to express how you want your business set up. Here's one that's an example of a flow chart, and it's broken down by roles that each play. And I think this is pretty cool. And I'm not even that nerdy. But it starts at a start and ending point, right? And in this case, it's a customer loan. And so the customer has a role and your employee has a role. So if you're, offering loans for your business, the customer comes in and applies for a loan. The loan officer will get the application. If it's complete, it goes down. If it's not complete, it kicks it back to the customer. And so you're creating a process back and forth that involves the customer. And so it's also lets the customer know where they fall into this in the process. That's one thing that really frustrates customers is when they don't understand the process. So having this chart go back and forth to the point where they have an approved loan is the goal that you're trying to work with. So you start with the customer applying, and you end up with the loan being approved or not approved. And the different roles. When does it get kicked to the credit department? It only goes when the credit approval is done after the loan is all complete. All the inputs are set up. Okay. So why is this helpful, having this map with the different roles? Why is it helpful? Then I'll frame it a little bit. Why is it helpful when you have a team?
Because everyone will look for, you can share. And then you can finish faster because everyone is in charge of something.
So you can finish faster because everyone's in charge of something. So think about, what's the goal of business process improvement? What's the main takeaway that you want to improve? You're creating value for the customer, right? So how is a flowchart like this with the different roles within your company important to the customer? So they know that they're valued, okay. So I'm hiring my first person. Let's say I do loans and I'm the credit department, I'm the loan officer, I do everything, sales, marketing, and I'm used to handling customers. When I start hiring employees and I want to have them have control over their job, they know when it leaves their role into somebody else. So they're not bothering somebody else. They don't bother the customer. When the loan is not complete, they know that they have to go back to the customer and get it. And they're so like, I need everything packaged perfectly because I want to make this thing run perfect when it goes through the credit department. So is there one thing I can get a little bit more information for you to complete that? And so they know what their role is in that position, and they know how to interact with all the different roles, including the customer. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Interviews and surveys. When you're looking at your existing business processes, you want to interview the current position. If you are the only employee there, if you're a non-employer business and you work for yourself, it's a little bit easier to interview yourself. But you want to incorporate all the different roles in the process so you can analyze where to make improvements. Okay, I'll check that. There you go. So one of the examples I have is, let's say you buy into a pizza place and you're the new owner, new manager, and you're trying to figure out how to create a better business process for your pizza place. You can create a survey, and I've done it here. Let's see if I can. So I just created a survey here that says, and you send this out to your customers. When ordering a pizza, what is important to you? Is it taste, price, speed, accuracy? How fast do you want it delivered? What's the most important part of a pizza? And what's the price that you want to pay? So just a 4-question survey, and I'll walk you through how you can analyze the results. So if I interviewed all these customers and I got all these feedback, and I said, okay, when I analyzed customers and I interviewed 17 customers, what was most important? Most of them said taste is most important. What was the most important factor, the taste? It was, seems like the crust and the sauce is the most important. How fast do you want it delivered? And most people wanted it pretty fast, right? And it seems like around the cutoff time is 45 minutes. What's the most important on the taste of the pizza? I already asked that. It's a duplicate. Let me delete that. How much are you willing to pay, right? So right there, it seems like the cutoff is around $17. So you look at all this data and you can go back to your business process. If you're gonna make any improvements, now you've got the customer's reaction and you can incorporate on what are the things you wanna improve, right? So if I was gonna focus on anything in the quality of the pizza, it would be the taste, right? And taste is always more important than speed and accuracy. Okay? So that's important. If you're improving the speed of your process, right, but you're doing it at the expense of taste, then that's something that you have to look at. And anything that you do better not distract from taste. What are your factors in the taste of a pizza? So when we're talking about taste, is the crust and sauce are important, and pizza times are important. So might be something you start to look at, and you say, what is the average time for your pizza to be delivered? And you start creating a thing where I say, I don't want any pizza delivered later than 30 minutes, because then my customers start getting upset. Okay, so then you create a process where you make sure you get it there in that time. And it seems like price is important, but it's not the most important factor. So now you have some criteria from the customer to help you figure out what your processes are. And then you can create kind of a guide and a standard for your pizza, so all your employees know, and that you're creating this is your consistency charts, right? So we know that some customers enjoy quality. Taste is very, very important. The speed is very important. The price is pretty important, but it's not always the most important thing. Okay, so we want it to be, this is the cutoff time. We want it less than 35 minutes. We ideally want it, and what the priorities are, right? With quality, speed, and price. And that way we know as a team what is the most important things we need to work on. Does that make sense? And then you compare the results of what you have versus your competitors, right? The time to deliver, the reviews of taste. You can compare price, and you can insert questions into the surveys as needed. So the objective is to create more value through the customers. And this is where I don't want to say you fall into the trap of listening too much to the customers and creating business improvement based on them. So just take it with a grain of salt that, hey, are you out of here? Yeah. Come back next week if you want to. Do you want your calendar? Sure. Thanks for coming.
I will see you next week.
Okay, take care.
Thank you, Matthew.
Where am I? I forget where I'm at. So you compare the results and you benchmark it, which means that you want to compare it to what your competitors are doing to make sure that you're staying competitive in the marketplace. Okay. Not catering to your customers too much. You gotta.
Like real, for example, like when you ask the price, they put things in place, but then that's actually customer or a value improvement as well. But identify real reviews, both on the positive side.
Right, and that's one thing Clayton was saying. You have to look at the Yelp reviews and how the customers feedback, both the positive and negative. One thing that's really a struggle is that you'll get one review that says, oh, the price is horrible, I'll never shop there, right? And then you're like, oh, I need to make the price cheaper. And then that suffers in taste or timing or something else like that. So it cuts something else because you listen to one review. Whereas if you look at what you're not trying to solve every problem. So you might get some reviews that say you're not the cheapest price, which is okay if you're focusing on quality of the ingredients and the taste and time, right? That price might not be the one factor that you're going for. So you want to fit it into what your marketing and sales strategies are. So take any comments or feedbacks and then look at the customers you're really trying to attract and keep, and then focus on those types of feedback. So, okay. because not every company has to be the best at everything. There are plenty of companies that can be the cheapest price, but it might not be the best tasting. So in the redesign of the business process, the steps of redesigning the existing and converting it to new, now that you've looked at the old business process, you've taken some surveys and feedback on what's important to your customers and the marketplace. If you want to do the redesign, the steps are: imagine what a better process might look like, test those ideas out, consider what ifs in the design. Those are things you can try out. Document the redesign, try it out and get feedback from all the parties. So all the people that are on your team, and even incorporate customers into it. In the redesign process, you can role play and see what it would look like. So visualize that process operating. You can practice with real inputs, activities, and outputs. If it's a big enough company, you'll want to computer simulate. So we had a friend of mine used to work at Jack in the Box, marketing. And figured maybe you just want to look at my for a minute. So a friend of mine worked at Jack in the Box, and they're local in San Diego. And so it was really interesting to hear their business processes of how they develop. And so they're located in San Diego, and they've got, I don't know how many stores, 1,000 plus restaurants. So when they introduce a new product, they don't, bam, introduce it to everywhere. And so they look at the processes they have and the inputs it takes to make the new cheeseburger or sandwich or whatever they do. And they look at what they can do within the constraints that they have at the restaurant. And then they test it out on a local market. And if it looks well and the customer is getting some satisfaction out of there, they'll roll it out to the big market. So it's really interesting how bigger companies do that. If you're a small company and you don't have a ton of resources in companies to do this test, you've got to figure out ways to incorporate it with the resources you have. Obviously, you don't want to just change everything you do every single time, but it should be a continual process to change and move forward, incorporating everyone that's on your team and the customer to create that value. I know, a lot of information tonight. Good information. And I am recording it, so that's good. So in the redesign, you want to create some metrics where this is what it was when we implement the new process. How do I measure if it's better? And so create some measure. It could be how much it cost. Did the cost go down for you? Is it how much the customer likes it better? Is it delivering the pizza is faster? So you need to create some metrics so you have the before and after measurement. And so that's why you want to look at the existing methods and figure out what are the things that you're trying to increase. So if you're increasing the speed it's delivered at the detriment of the customer taste, right? Or it's making it more expensive or something, you need to look at, what are you giving up to get what you want? So tips are, remember customer value. Don't be constrained by current resources. So that means if you buy a new machine and it makes things faster or cheaper or better, so look at what the cost or to bring it in and how much value that might create. Attack biggest time wasters first. Identify areas that can be simplified or combined. Look for frustration points and bottlenecks. Those are pretty obvious tips. Okay, so in the redesign, document what it should look like, get buy-in, get the metrics, move forward. Acquire needed resources that you need to implement these things. Resources are usually acquired in 2 steps. Determine what types of resources are needed and get them. Right? Okay, so there are lots of different types of resources. You can get new work roles, which means your employees might need to get a new skill. New equipment or technology, you might need to get a new space for people to work in. You might to get buy-in from other departments, training. Yeah, okay. Let's see where I'm at right here in this. Oh, I got about 5 more slides to go, so. I know, I feel like we're on information overload. But a few more and then we'll have it recorded so you can come back to it. So in the implementation phase, the steps are understand the obstacles and avoid them. All right, so part of that is visualizing the process of what everything that bad might happen and figure out how to create a new process, right? So those are the hurdles. What are some hurdles to avoid during implementing the new process? The major ones are resistance from your employees. And nobody likes change. So having the desired outcomes and having the buy-in from your employees is really important. Remember, if you're always saying that you're striving to create more customer value and that's your end goal, then your employees, how can they argue with that, right? Because you're creating more customer satisfaction. So having that buy-in and understanding what the goal of why you're doing these things is helpful. So it's not just about the thing, it's about the process. Resistance from managers, from customers, no leader to overcome obstacles. So there will be obstacles, but you need some leaders and champions that bought into it. And that's why you typically want to have people from different roles help in the BPI so that they can contribute and they can all suggest changes and then everybody gets a buy-in. And so when these hiccups or hurdles happen, you have people within the organization that say like, no, we got to try this. And also if you have the metrics. So if people know what they're testing it against, the objective is to increase something. And if you're not increasing it, then it doesn't make sense to keep pursuing it, right? So some tips: communicate before and during, educate on why, test it, measure during, remove temptations to go back. Okay, you don't want to move back in the business processing. So a lot of people will try to sabotage what you're trying to doing and implementing business processes. So you want to remove any temptations to go back to back processes. Okay, it's really simple for people. This is the way we always did it. Let's do it that way. So you either need to like take away the old equipment or incentivize success. So people know that by increasing productivity or customer satisfaction, there's a carrot that rewards them. So, and as Aristotle said, quality is not an act, it's a habit. So the process, if you realize that it's continual process of improvement, that it's not a one-time thing, and have that ingrained in your company culture that you're always going to look at processes, you're always going to be developing these things. So make it a habit of always being improving what you're doing. So in continuous improvement, measure your performance, create the metrics, and create some goals. So one last takeaway, remember metrics. If your numbers aren't what you want, then take action to make changes. The goals are the most important. The process is how you achieve them. So if you have the goals of whatever it is you're trying to do, make the better taste, get better reviews, make it out faster, whatever it is your goals that you're trying to achieve, if you're not hitting those goals, then you need to look at the plan and you can change the process. And the goal is to achieve what you're trying to get, the goals. The goals are the goals, right? I think that's it. All right, it's end of session. Bam. Whew. Man, that was a lot of information. So we had we didn't meet two less times than normal, so we fit 2 into this. A lot of information. There are a few videos in the slides and online for you to look at more of the business process information. There is a quiz on business process for you to review. But I'm going to stop recording now, or pause it. That way we can ask any questions and chat as much as we need to.